Chosen one, this is beyond embarrassing for them. Think about it, an entire town, with all its resources, connections, strategies, and unified hatred, gathered together to take down one single individual, and still lost. The very idea is almost laughable, if it weren't so utterly pathetic. Imagine being so threatened by one person that they had to rally family, neighbors, local authorities, and even complete strangers, just to try and break you. Imagine being so weak that an army was needed to fight against someone whose only weapons were truth and a pure heart. They didn't realize that when they declared war on you, they were also declaring war on the universe itself, and the universe never loses. It simply waits, choosing the most humiliating way possible for its enemies to destroy themselves. What began as whispers grew into a chorus of coordinated destruction. Your ex wasn't satisfied with just pulling in their own family, though blood thickened by lies was easy enough to manipulate. No, this web stretched wider, woven deeply into the fabric of your entire community. The revelations came in layers, each one more shocking than the last friends you had trusted for years, neighbors who once borrowed sugar and exchanged small talk, authority figures sworn to protect and serve, and even family members who should have stood by you unconditionally. One by one, they had been turned with surgical precision. They disguised it as concern, intervention, or tough love. But the truth was clear. They were willingly participating in something that mirrored the ugliest pages of history, all because your ex had painted you as a threat to be neutralized. The scale of it all should have broken you. It should have terrified you and sent you running to some distant city where anonymity might have kept you safe. But chosen ones don't run from battles they are destined to win, even if they don't yet see victory on the horizon. What your enemies failed to consider, what they never could touch, was your heart. That pure, uncorrupted heart became your greatest shield, while they twisted logic, insisting that north was south and up was down. Your inner compass remained true. You could feel the wrongness of it all deep within, even when the world screamed otherwise. When you began to speak, pointing out inconsistencies and impossible coincidences, they laughed. Your ex and their accomplices mocked you, believing their numbers and influence made you untouchable. To them, you were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. What could little old you possibly do against such a mighty coalition? They were about to learn. For some, psychological warfare wasn't enough. They grew more desperate, dabbling in forces they didn't even understand, attempting spiritual attacks against someone whose spirit was shielded by something far greater than their collective malice. Night after night, they funneled hatred, jealousy, and rage toward you, convinced their unified intent would overwhelm you. But what they didn't realize was that purity carries its own power. Every curse, every dart of envy, every shadow they tried to cast bounced back, reflected and amplified by the very light they sought to extinguish. The results were nothing short of extraordinary. The negative energy they directed at you didn't destroy you, it destroyed them. The darkness they conjured returned with greater force, unraveling their own lives piece by piece. In trying to curse you, they cursed themselves. And you, chosen one, stood untouched, shielded, not by numbers or schemes, but by the strength of your spirit and the purity of your heart. The insomnia came first, creeping into their nights until rest became impossible. Then came the paranoia, the kind of gnawing madness that arises when your own malice rebounds back at you tenfold. They began to see shadows where none existed, hear whispers in the silence, and encounter phenomena that blurred the line between imagination and reality. Skeptics among them were transformed into frightened believers, reduced to trembling children hiding beneath blankets. And at the center of it all, your ex, the silver-tongued manipulator who orchestrated this entire campaign, suffered the most. Their obsession with you became grotesque, pathetic, and terrifying all at once. They couldn't leave the past behind, because the past had turned into a living force, hunting them down. and they knew that facing you would mean confronting the enormity of everything they had done. When their traditional attacks failed, each one backfiring more spectacularly than the last, desperation drove your ex into darker practices. They turned to mirror magic and candle rituals, sending warped reflections of their own energy toward you, hoping to trap you in cycles of doubt and self-destruction. They carved your name into candle wax, performing rituals meant to bind your spirit and break your will. But what they never understood about mirrors is this: mirrors reflect truth. When a pure heart gazes into a mirror, it sees only love reflected back. When a twisted heart attempts mirror magic on the pure-hearted, all it reveals is the monstrous reflection of their own corruption. Every curse they cast ricocheted, landing on themselves. Every mirror became a damning portrait of the darkness festering within them. They were literally watching themselves morph into the very monsters they had always been inside, and the sight pushed them closer to complete psychological collapse. The candle magic proved even more devastating. Fire, by its nature, purifies. When wielded with malicious intent against someone divinely protected, it doesn't harm the target, it consumes the sender. With each ritual, their own spiritual defenses burned away, leaving them vulnerable, stripped and exposed, while your spiritual shield only grew stronger. Every flame they lit to curse you was another spark, dismantling their psychic protection. In trying to destroy you, they systematically destroyed themselves. As if that weren't enough, the deeper investigators dug into your ex's activities, the more a tangled web of corruption was exposed. What began as a case of personal betrayal unraveled into an entire portfolio of financial crimes stretching back years. The forged signature wasn't an isolated act. It was part of a sprawling operation built on fraud and deception. They had forged names on legal documents, falsified insurance claims, manipulated financial instruments, stolen identities, opened accounts under false pretenses, and siphoned money from countless unsuspecting victims. The operation was so sophisticated that investigators began to suspect professional criminal training in financial fraud. Yet, the forgery of your name was different. This wasn't just about greed, it was personal, laced with venom. These weren't merely forged documents, they were weapons aimed at destroying your reputation, your credit, your livelihood, your very foundation. The level of hatred required to meticulously dismantle someone's financial life revealed not just malice but a pathological obsession, and that obsession became their downfall. While they were meticulous and calculating with strangers, covering their tracks with clinical precision, their obsession with destroying you made them careless. Emotional investment led to sloppy mistakes, leaving behind trails of evidence that investigators quickly followed. Ironically, the vendetta against you became the single thread that unraveled their entire criminal empire. As their empire crumbled and desperation reached unbearable levels, your ex reached for their lowest, most pitiful tactic yet, the fabrication of a baby trap scenario. The timing couldn't have been more telling. It emerged precisely as the legal walls closed in and public opinion shifted decisively against them and their network. This wasn't an innocent lie born of panic. It was calculated manipulation, designed to serve multiple purposes at once. They hoped to distract investigators, sway sympathies, and regain control through deceit. But by this point, even the most gullible were beginning to see through their games. They hoped their fabricated baby trap would guilt you into reconciliation, stir public sympathy, and create just enough legal complications to stall the investigations closing in on them. It was their final desperate grasp at controlling a narrative that had long since slipped through their fingers. But the universe has its own way of exposing lies born from malice. Documents didn't add up. Their story grew shakier with every retelling, and no evidence could be found to support their claims. Even their closest allies, once unwavering, began to shift uneasily. The lie was too blatant, too grotesque, too reckless. That was the moment their supporters began to question everything, realizing they had crossed from manipulation into outright fraud. There is something especially disturbing about fabricating parenthood as a weapon. It revealed an emotional sickness so deep that even hardened manipulators felt uneasy. The baby trap scheme stripped away the last shred of credibility they had, their inner circle fractured, allies turned into skeptics, and whispers of betrayal spread among the very people they had counted on for loyalty. For the first time, those who had blindly supported them were forced to acknowledge the bottomless pit of deception they were dealing with. But the most devastating revelation wasn't about them, it was about those closest to you. As layers of conspiracy peeled back like rotting paint, you uncovered something that pierced deeper than any stranger's cruelty. Your own family, those who were supposed to love you unconditionally, had been drawn into the campaign against you. Not all of them perhaps, but enough to shatter your faith in blood loyalty. Some were adoptive parents who had never fully embraced you. Others were step-relatives who saw an opportunity to cast you out. But the most painful betrayal came from those connected to you by birth, the ones who had traded your well-being for the illusion of belonging within the conspiracy. They fed your tormentors everything, your fears, your doubts, your vulnerabilities, and even your private moments of weakness, all of it weaponized against you by voices that had once sung you lullabies, celebrated your birthdays, and called themselves your safe harbor. That betrayal cut deeper than any enemy's blade, because it came from the people you once trusted most. It clears the way for something greater. When earthly family turns away, spiritual family steps forward. When human protection falls away, divine protection strengthens. Chosen ones are never meant to walk their path alone, because celestial allies always rise in their defense. And the universe was far from finished protecting you. Your ancestors, those who had lived their own struggles and earned their place in the eternal realm, began to move on your behalf. They saw what was happening to their descendant, and they were not pleased. At first the haunting was subtle, dreams so vivid they felt more real than waking life, shadows shifting without a source, whispers in empty rooms. Slowly the supernatural made itself undeniable. Those who had mocked your faith, ridiculed your intuition, and dismissed your spiritual strength, suddenly found themselves trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. The very forces they had laughed at became the forces that turned their nights into terror. And these forces weren't merciful. The leader of your persecution, the one always ruled by jealousy, inadequacy, and reckless impulses, began to unravel completely. Their carefully crafted mask, the facade they had spent years perfecting, couldn't withstand the weight of supernatural justice. One crack at a time, their world caved in, leaving them exposed not just to human judgment, but to the eternal justice of those watching from beyond the veil. They couldn't comprehend why their tried and true methods of destruction were failing so spectacularly. Every tactic that had once worked on others now collapsed in their hands, backfiring with humiliating precision. As the investigation pressed deeper, the full scale of what you were up against came into view. This wasn't merely about your ex's wounded pride or a community swept up in misguided concern. It was far darker. What had been aimed at you was part of something much bigger. A network operating in the shadows, using experimental psychological torture as a testing ground for strategies that could later be deployed on a larger scale. The corruption ran through every level of authority. Law enforcement officers sworn to protect and serve had abandoned their oaths to become foot soldiers in this campaign of psychological warfare. They filed false reports, buried legitimate complaints, and actively joined in the harassment designed to crush you. The badge that should have been a shield of justice had become a weapon of oppression. But the rabbit hole went deeper than anyone imagined. As investigators peeled back layers of deceit, they uncovered evidence so disturbing that even hardened professionals struggled to process it. Behind the smiling faces of pillars of the community, There were child exploitation rings operating under the guise of charitable organizations. Human trafficking was disguised as social services. The systematic abuse of society's most vulnerable had been woven into the fabric of the very institutions meant to protect them, and without realizing it, your case had become the crack that splintered their foundation. What they thought was a campaign to silence one inconvenient truth-teller became the very act that exposed their entire network to the light. The irony was perfect. In trying to destroy you, they triggered the collapse of the system they had built to protect themselves. Your pure heart became a beacon, drawing attention from forces that would not allow such darkness to thrive unchecked. Lies began unraveling under their own weight. False reports contradicted one another. Fabricated complaints and manufactured evidence formed a web so tangled that even corrupt officials couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. The narrative that once seemed airtight, because it was repeated by a chorus of conspirators, suddenly crumbled, revealing holes wide enough for anyone to see. Even your ex's family, those who had joined out of misplaced loyalty, began to falter. Some finally saw the cracks in the story they'd been fed and started asking questions they were never supposed to ask. Others clung more tightly to their hatred, unable to face the shame of realizing they had been pawns in something monstrous. The secret society that once looked untouchable now found itself dragged into the spotlight. And here's the truth: when you target someone protected by divine forces, you don't just cross a person, you cross into the jurisdiction of cosmic justice. Unlike human justice, cosmic justice cannot be bribed, corrupted, or intimidated. The once solid network began to splinter. Suspicion seeped into their ranks, corroding the unity they had relied on. Allies turned wary, factions fought to protect themselves, and betrayal spread like a disease. In their desperation to survive, they began sacrificing one another, proving that loyalty had never been their foundation. Fear had. And then, in the midst of this chaos, came the turning point. The moment when everything shifted and the power dynamic they had clung to shattered completely. The cosmic joke finally revealed its punchline. And it wasn't you who stood at the center of universal humor. It was them. The same community that had mocked you for daring to speak truth. The same people who had dismissed your warnings and laughed at your resilience, suddenly found themselves confronted with the undeniable reality of what they had participated in: illegal surveillance, coordinated harassment, a criminal conspiracy designed to annihilate the life of an innocent person. The rabbit hole went deeper than they ever admitted, darker than they ever imagined, and they could no longer deny how far they had sunk. For a time they thought themselves clever, united, and powerful, but their arrogance had blinded them to the most fatal mistake of all. They underestimated you. They mistook your kindness for weakness, your love for naivety, your pure heart for vulnerability. What they failed to realize is that the universe doesn't choose weaklings. It chooses those who can endure fire and emerge refined. It chooses those who can love even in the face of hate, who can stand rooted in truth while surrounded by lies, who can maintain integrity when the entire world conspires against them. That was you, and when they realized it, the laughter stopped. The mockery dissolved, their casual cruelty turned into something they had never expected to feel around you: fear. Because the truth dawned on them, they hadn't been attacking a victim. They had been waging war against a force of nature, and forces of nature cannot be subdued. Exposure came in waves, each more devastating than the last. First, the obvious criminals were caught. The falsified police reports, the forged documents, the financial fraud. These crimes left trails too clear, too undeniable, even for the most corrupt officials to cover forever. And your ex, the manipulator who thought themselves untouchable, found themselves cornered, facing consequences for the very first time. But it didn't stop there. It couldn't. Criminal conspiracies are like houses of cards. Remove one piece and the entire structure collapses. The authorities who had enabled the scheme were suddenly under investigation. Community members who had participated in the harassment now found themselves questioned, their lies unraveling under scrutiny. The so-called secret society, which once seemed so powerful, discovered its greatest strength. Secrecy was also its fatal weakness. When the light finally hit their hidden world, they couldn't shield themselves behind collective influence. Their masks were ripped away, and each member stood alone, accountable for the choices they had made. And then came the ultimate irony. The very meticulousness that had once given them pride became their undoing. Those careful records, those so-called experiments in psychological torture, which they had documented as if they were conducting legitimate science, were now evidence, irrefutable proof of their crimes. Their professionalism had become their prosecution. The universe, it seems, truly does have a sense of humor, because what your tormentors believed was their victory parade turned out to be their funeral march. What they thought was a coordinated attack against you revealed itself as their coordinated suicide. They hadn't destroyed you, they had destroyed themselves, all while you stood untouched, shielded by the truth, fortified by the divine, and chosen for a destiny no conspiracy could erase. They had spent countless hours, sleepless nights, and immeasurable energy plotting your destruction. Every resource they could gather, every connection they could exploit, every dark method they could conjure was poured into the campaign against you. Yet, in their single-minded obsession, they overlooked something fatal. They had forgotten to shield themselves. They became so consumed with striking you down that they left their own defenses wide open. In their arrogance, they invited into their lives the very forces they thought they could command. And when those forces turned on them, when the curses they whispered, the rituals they performed, and the malicious energy they projected came ricocheting back multiplied tenfold, they found themselves defenseless, unprepared, and utterly vulnerable. The unraveling began with desperation. The baby trap, a pathetic attempt to entangle you in their chaos, revealed how far they had fallen. Their frantic efforts to stay relevant, the increasingly erratic behavior that spilled into every corner of their lives, all of it painted the picture of someone unraveling under the weight of their own lies. They had thrown every weapon at you, convinced that sheer force, deception, and manipulation could bend reality to their will, but instead of breaking you, they fractured themselves. Their campaign, which was meant to destroy your foundation, became the wrecking ball that demolished their own. The projection was breathtaking in its clarity. Every accusation hurled at you revealed more about them than it ever did about you. They called you delusional, yet it was they who lived inside a fantasy of control. They painted you as unstable, yet they were the ones whose paranoia gnawed at their sanity. They claimed you were dishonest, but every word they spoke unraveled into contradiction and exposure. What they tried to pin on you was nothing but their own reflection, magnified for all to see. It would have been poetic if it weren't so devastating to witness. They were not only liars, they were prisoners of their own lies. They could not face reality, and worse, they could not accept accountability for their actions. And it was in this chaos that your true calling began to crystallize. You finally began to understand why you had been chosen, not because you were flawless, because no one is, not because you were the strongest in brute force, or the wisest in worldly knowledge. You were chosen precisely because you were willing to remain pure in a world that punished purity, because you dared to remain vulnerable in a culture that mocked and weaponized vulnerability, because you stood firm in truth, even when everyone else screamed that you were mad. Your strength was not in perfection, but in authenticity. You were willing to be real when others wore masks. You were willing to speak when others stayed silent. You were willing to endure the fire, not to emerge unscarred, but to emerge purified. Your destiny was never just about survival. It was about revelation. You were meant to expose what others had hidden, to be the light that illuminates shadows no one dared to enter, to be the spark that ignites justice where injustice had long reigned. You were never meant to take revenge. The universe had already taken that role. Your role was to stand, to endure, to be the undeniable proof that no conspiracy, no matter how well coordinated or far-reaching, can triumph over truth. They believed they were breaking you, but every attempt only tempered you into something stronger. Every lie sharpened the brilliance of your truth. Every attempt to isolate you connected you deeper to divine protection, to ancestral forces, to cosmic guardians that stood watch over you. And now, as their carefully constructed world fell apart, yours began to rebuild on stronger ground. You could finally see the bigger picture, the divine design stretching far beyond your personal battle. This was never just about you. It was about every soul who had ever been silenced by power, every person gaslit into believing their truth was madness, every victim harassed, ridiculed, or abused by corrupt systems and cowardly mobs. Your story became a mirror for theirs. Your resilience became proof that survival is possible. Your victory became a prophecy that truth cannot be buried forever. And the most poetic part of this cosmic joke was its simplicity. They had engineered their own collapse. Every consequence they now faced, every sleepless night, every fractured relationship, every loss of reputation, every legal repercussion, was the direct result of choices they had made. You did not need to plan revenge. You did not need to plot schemes or orchestrate their downfall. You only had to stand in your authenticity. You only had to remain true to yourself, to your calling, to your heart. And the universe, in its infinite wisdom, handled the rest. This was the lesson written into your journey. The righteous do not need to destroy their enemies, because evil always devours itself. Darkness collapses under its own weight when confronted by light. Lies unravel under the steady endurance of truth. And those who seek to entrap others always end up imprisoned by their own snares. That is why you were chosen, not to be spared from trials, but to be proof that trials refine rather than define. Proof that resilience is not about never falling, but about rising every time. Proof that, in a world of shadows, one pure heart can shift the entire balance. And as their downfall became undeniable, as their empire of deceit turned to ash, you realized something profound. You had not simply survived them, you had transcended them. Their failure to destroy you had become the stage for your awakening, and through you, countless others who had been silenced, mocked, or shamed would begin to see their own power reflected back at them, because your story was not just your own. It was a blueprint, a testimony, and a reminder. No conspiracy, no matter how vast, can overpower truth aligned with divine purpose. Your ex, the silver-tongued manipulator who once thrived on deceit, suddenly found themselves tongue-tied when forced to face the undeniable truth of their actions. The one who had always thought they could charm, twist, and scheme their way out of accountability stood speechless as their lies crumbled. The one who had never learned how to manage money, who lived recklessly off fraud and illusion, now faced the crushing weight of financial ruin. The one who had spent years playing elaborate mind games discovered the most terrifying opponent of all, their own mind turning against them, haunted by the shadows they had created. And it wasn't just your ex who was forced to confront reality. The community that had rallied against you, whispering rumors, spreading lies, and lending their strength to the conspiracy, now found themselves staring into the mirror of truth. Some, broken by the weight of guilt, felt genuine shame and sought to make amends. A few came forward apologizing, trying in clumsy ways to repair the damage they had helped cause. Others, unable to face the magnitude of their betrayal, retreated deeper into denial, clinging to excuses even as the evidence of their wrongdoing towered over them. But all of them, without exception, had to live with the knowledge that they had been part of something truly evil. They could no longer pretend it was harmless gossip or misguided concern. They had joined a campaign that sought to annihilate a single soul, and in doing so revealed the darkness within themselves. The authorities who had betrayed their oath, who had filed false reports, ignored pleas for help, and turned their badges into weapons of harassment, found themselves under investigation. Stripped of their shields of authority, they faced the reality of accountability. The secret society that once cloaked itself in power, influence, and silence suddenly found its hidden rituals and connections dragged into the open. What had seemed untouchable was now fragile, exposed, and vulnerable. The network that had strutted with arrogance, believing itself indestructible, began to dissolve under its own weight. Chaos, finger-pointing, and recrimination tearing it apart from the inside. And you, chosen one, emerged from this crucible, not untouched, but transformed. No one could endure what you endured and remain unmarked. The scars are real, the wounds undeniable, but scars are proof of survival. And you walked out not broken, but refined like gold that has passed through fire, stronger than before, wiser than before, more deeply connected to your divine purpose than ever before. Being chosen never meant a life free from suffering. It meant you were equipped to transform suffering into wisdom, pain into purpose, persecution into power. You learned the truth of your heart, that purity is not weakness but strength, that the capacity to love in the face of hate is not naive but revolutionary. You discovered that truth requires no army to defend it. It only needs one soul willing to stand for it, no matter the cost. You realize that the universe never abandons its chosen ones. It may move slowly. It may reveal its plan in ways you never expect. But its justice is always certain, always precise, always perfect in timing. Ironically, the very people who sought to destroy you became your greatest teachers. They were the sharpening stone against which your spirit was honed. They tested your resolve, your integrity, your ability to love in the midst of hate, to hold on to light in the midst of darkness. And you passed, not because you were flawless, but because you refused to abandon your essence. You remained true to who you were when everything around you demanded you become something else. Now here you stand, chosen one, in the ruins of their conspiracy, watching justice fall. Not the shallow justice you once imagined, but a deeper, more complete, more divine justice. A justice so perfectly calibrated that no human court could have delivered it. They thought they were writing your downfall. They thought they were the authors of your destruction, but in reality, they were only characters in a far greater story, a story authored by truth itself. A story where good triumphs over evil, where lies collapse under the weight of their own contradictions, where love proves itself stronger than hate. Think about it, the entire town, united in their hatred, mobilized all their strength against you, little old you, and in the end, that is precisely what it took to reveal the depth of their corruption, to unmask their true nature, to showcase just how much fear one pure heart can inspire in a corrupted system. Sometimes the universe gathers an army of villains, not to crush the chosen, but to reveal the power of the chosen in a way no one could ignore. It takes the weight of an entire town to show the unshakable resilience of a single warrior of light. And your story is not over, not even close. In truth, it has only just begun, because now you know who you really are. Now you know what you are capable of. Now you understand why you were placed in this fire and what you were meant to emerge as. You are not simply a survivor. You are not merely someone who endured. You are a warrior of light. And from this point forward, your very existence becomes testimony, living proof that truth cannot be destroyed, that love cannot be silenced, and that chosen ones cannot be defeated. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work,